Good morning, everyone. Nice to be here with you today. And unfortunately, we're not going to be live streaming this morning, but we will be taping. And for all of you who will be watching at a later time, welcome. My name is Swami Devaki, and this is Dr. Michelle working with me today, giving service. And we'll start with Rays of the One Light. And these are weekly commentaries based on the Bible and the Bhagavad Gita, written by Swami Ananda. Did God create the universe or become it? Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it in your deathless self within. The following commentary is based on the teachings of Paramahansa Yogananda. The Gospel of St. John, chapter 1, contains a passage that explains the essential truth that creation is a process of becoming. The universe is not separate from God the Creator, but a part of Him, even as our own dream creations during sleep are figments of our consciousness. God's is the life, God's the reality. Not a melody could be composed, nor a poem written, were the melody and the poem not already there, simply waiting to be expressed. In Him was life, and the life was the light of men. And the light shineth in darkness, and the darkness comprehended it not. Ego-directed desire is like static. It distorts the radioed messages of infinity. But the pristine impulse from the divine, undistorted by limitation and delusion, is the life that gives rise to all that is. As the 7th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita states, I am the fluidity of water. I am the silver light of the moon and the golden light of the sun. I am the Om chanted in all the Vedas, the cosmic sound moving as if soundlessly through the ether. I am the manliness of men. I am the good, sweet smell of the moist earth. I am the luminescence of fire, the sustaining life of all living creatures. I am self-offering in those who would expand their little lives into cosmic life. O Arjuna, know me as the eternal seed of all creatures. In the perceptive, I am their perception. In the great, I am their greatness. In the glorious, it is I who am their glory. And thus through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind. Om, Om, Om. So it's not the body that gives us life any more than it's the planets and the stars that hold up the universe. It's the indwelling spirit. It's God within us all. And God has dreamed this reality. And our goal, essentially, is to wake up from this dream and become consciously in communion with the dreamer. God is behind everything. God is in everything, in every atom, in every rock, in every human being, every plant, every animal. This morning I had to chuckle a little bit because I was reviewing my sermon as I woke up, and it's January, which I don't know if you realize this, but it is the time for the little skunks to come out. And sure enough, I had permeating my bedroom as I was lying there going over this, and Master was saying, we must love everything as we love God within it. Because God is equally, and I sat there and I thought, oh, Divine Mother, great perfume this morning, But we have got to learn to see God because He is equally in every single thing. And our task is to learn to see it and to love it. And Master said that there's two ways that we do that on our path. We learn to connect with God through meditation, through meditating on the light, deep, deep inner communion, meditating on the light, meditating on sound. And then, of course, the other way is through service. Learning to know, or believing that everything that we do is an act of love for God and is only for God, not to fulfill our desires, but to fulfill His. And Master said that we all need to be renunciates. Now there's two kinds of renunciates on the yoga path. One is those who renounce outwardly. They go into the monasteries, they become monks and nuns. And those who renounce, and all of us have to do this, whether you're living in the world or in the monastery. If you're living in the world and you're committed to your dharma and to achieving what God has asked you to do, you still have to learn inner renunciation. And that is going with the understanding that God is the doer in everything. As Swami said, the two things that we need to focus on the most in the spiritual path is to rid ourselves of the ego, which is attachment to the body or the physical plane, and to understand that God is the doer. And it's the pure motive that helps you to understand, that gives you that ability to understand that He is behind everything. And so Master said we have to become renunciates. And he said you could go off into a cave, you could go off onto an island, and you could try to rid yourself of all your troubles, all your responsibilities. He said, but if you haven't renounced it inwardly, if you haven't renounced it in the mind, he said your trials are going to follow you, your tests are going to follow you, your restless thoughts are going to follow you, your desires are going to follow you. He said when he ate, he said, I enjoy my food. He said, that's because I know that it's God that's eating through me. He said, if I eat or don't eat, it doesn't matter to me. Master said that we have got to treat our body as a temple for God's presence. So when you start to think along those lines with everything that you put in your mouth, every activity that you do, if you can remind yourself, because we're nothing but visitors on this planet. We use this body as a vehicle to transport us and to transport the God within. So if we can learn that everything that we do is for God, then we can progress. And when we serve, if we can remember that we're serving God. Master said that when we're disgruntled about something, some personal desire, he said that's the wrong attitude, absolutely the wrong attitude. He said the only thing that we should be concerned about is did we or did we not please God? He said he goes through life and he gives to people more than he gives to himself. He treats their property more respectfully than he treats his own because he loves God in everything. And when Swami was a young man, as you all know, he read the autobiography of a yogi and he decided he was going to go to Encinitas within a few days. So he got on a bus and he traveled to the West Coast. And on the way there, he said, I remembered a story that Master told about a great saint who was in a village and Master was going to go visit him. And the saint had no word that Master was coming. And when Master got there, the saint was waiting for him on the edge of the property of the village and welcoming him. And he thought, gee, I wonder if that's how it's going to be with me. Am I going to walk in and Master's going to throw his arms up and say, "Where have you been? We've waited for you." And he said, "No such luck." He got there, he went to Encinitas, and he went to the ashram there, and he rang the bell, and waited a few minutes before someone finally answered the door, and it was Sister Gyanamata, Master's most advanced woman disciple. And she said, "Hello, how are you?" And he thought that probably because of the way he pronounced Master's name and what he was wearing, which was, I think he called it South Beach attire, he said, which is actually more appropriate in Havana and Florida than it is in Southern California, that she looked at him and thought that he was someone there for the utilities. And she said, "Oh, you must be here for the water." He said, "No." He said, "I came to see Paramahansa Yogananda." And he also said that he had forgotten that, or he didn't even realize that Master had an organization. He was one of these people that was not thrilled with religious organizations. And so he said, when I read the autobiography, I completely overlooked the fact that this was an organization. But he said to her, I want to do his work. And she said, first of all, he's not here. He's away for the weekend. He's at Hollywood Temple. And there he's giving a service. And he said, "What? There's a church in Hollywood Temple, or there's a church in Hollywood?" And he said that was one strike against him. And another was that he looked at her and he said, "Well, I want to see him. How can I do that? I want to join this work." And she said, "Well, that's impossible." She said, "Have you looked at the teachings?" She cooled a little bit too, knowing that he actually had come there directly without having contacted them first. And he said, "Well, what teachings?" "Well, no, I don't know. How long would that take?" And she said, 4 years. He thought, 4 years? And his heart just sank, as you can imagine. But for Sister Gyanamata, who waited so long to get into Master's ashram, that seemed like a drop in the bucket. And he thinks basically, he said it wasn't really, it was not as strict as she said, because he felt she was probably trying to cool his presumption. And so he said, "Well, I want to go see him. How do I do that?" And she said, "Well, you can go to Hollywood and go to the temple there." And she gave him the number and the address. And he said on his way there, he started talking to God. And I'm going to read to you what he said. He said, "On the way there, I alternated between bouts of indignation at her presumption and desperate prayers to be accepted. This was the first time in my life that I had wanted anything so desperately. I mustn't be refused. At one point, thinking again of my elderly informant, my mind was once again waxing indignant when suddenly I remembered her eyes. They had been very calm. Even I reflected with some astonishment, wise. Certainly there was far more to her than I noticed in the urgency of my desire. Forgive me for my misjudgment, I prayed mentally. It was in any case wrong for me to think unkindly of her. She was only doing her duty, and I sense now, however, that she is a great soul. Forgive me." And he said at that moment, a cloud lifted, and he felt that he had been accepted into the work. So he continued on to the Hollywood Temple, and when he got there, he walked in, and the secretary was there, and he said, "I want to speak to Yogananda." And she said, "Well, that's impossible. He's in the middle of something right now. He can't be disturbed." And his heart sunk, and he said, "I've traveled so far." And again, she cooled, and she said, "You didn't think to write first?" And he said, "No." He said, "That thought didn't cross my mind." And so she said, "Well, I'm sorry, but he's booked." Well, he said, "When can I see him?" He said, "Oh, 2.5 months, maybe." And Swami he just was so disheartened. He said, "I was so morose, and I just started walking around the church and looking." at all the different, the beauty of the church. And he came across Norman, who was one of the monks there, and they were chatting, and Swami pointed to a couple of fellows there, and he said, well, who are they? And he said, well, they're a couple guys that want to be monks. And he said, well, how long have they been there? He said, oh, not very long. He said, a few months. Swami thought, great. So at that point, he was ready to give it up. And he just said, well, I guess there's some reason that I'm being humbled right now. He said, I'll go into the Hollywood Hills, and I will, I'll practice, I'll study the teachings, and then I'll come to Sunday service here, and I'll just wait. Maybe I'm just not ready. I'll just wait until the Master calls me. He'll know. He realized, he said, I guess things have always just come too easy for me. But I guess I'm going to have to wait this one out. And as he started to leave, this lady that was the secretary came up behind him, and she said, hold on just a second. She said, because you've come such a long distance. She said, let me go in and see if he'll see you. And of course she did, and the rest is history. Swami was initiated that very day. But the reason I'm reading this for you is because of his attitude with it all, and his communion with God the whole time, always asking, what is it that I need to learn right now? What are you trying to teach me? What are you trying to show me? We don't see always this invisible hand that is working underneath it all. And I'll give you an example one time when I saw it very clearly when I was at a Sunday service that Swami Kriyananda gave. And he apparently wanted to talk to me that day. So he wanted me to come and meet with him. And so I had come in, I didn't know this, and I'd come in and I sat in the service. And you know how it is, you get kind of timid, you see our front chairs or nobody's there. Well, that was kind of how I was feeling. It was like, I'm just going to sit back. I mean, who am I to sit up front? But there was a chair that was right there, and it had a piece of fabric over it or a scarf. Of course, I thought, well, it's been saved for somebody. Well, honestly, what happened was all of a sudden that scarf was removed, and I was literally coaxed to come into that chair by people that were surrounded by me who didn't really know anything about what was going on. But somehow I was just brought into that chair. It was like magic. It really was. It had such a magical feel to it. And at the end of service, Swami walked right to me and told me he wanted to see me. Well, obviously that's Swami understanding that God is the doer. All he had to do was put up that desire, and God took care of it. And as he says, it's the pure motive. It's the pure motive that shows us that God is the doer. So as we go through our lives, these are just things to remember, of course, to meditate and to constantly commune with God. Offer everything back to him. Say, what do you want me to do? What do you want me to learn here? And sometimes, Master said, when you're new on the path, or even someone who's pretty seasoned, you still go to the guru and ask for his guidance. Because he says, you don't have control over your life. If you did, he said, I would just say, go ahead and do what you need to do. He said, but the only one that really has that kind of control is a master. So for us, sometimes we have to do things that we don't want to do. And we need to do things that we should do. And that's what gives us freedom. I had prayed one time because I had a very strong desire, and I prayed to Master and I said, why do you, what is it? Why are you holding this back from me? I don't understand. And he said, because I want you to be free. I want you to be free. So he's working for us, working with us all the time. We don't see it, but the more we move in that direction, understanding and believing that God is the doer, the more we purify our own motives, the more we'll see it. Okay. Mm-hmm.
Morning, everyone. I was very blessed to spend this past week in seclusion and just randomly grabbed a book off the bookshelf to take with me. And of course, it wasn't random. To my surprise and delight, it contained several talks and essays by Yogananda that were relevant to this morning's topic and that I hadn't read before. And it was really fun to read the beginning of one of these where Yogananda said, I've spoken about this topic, why God created the universe, how he created the universe, many times. But, I'll quote here, through infinite concentration, one receives ever new light on this enigma. And I thought, oh, isn't that fascinating? Here's a master who's talked about this many times, and yet he's still concentrating on this and still getting new insight about this. And I think this was just a topic he was really interested in because he spoke about it from so many different angles. And he said that God dreams in the rocks and the stones, that his consciousness begins to stir in the sensitivity of the plants. It expresses itself in sentient life and in the animal kingdom, and that his innate vitality and consciousness finds expression in the human ability to reason and discriminate. And then in the superhuman, the masters and the saints, the superconsciousness of God is fully revealed. As I was thinking about this morning's topic and God being present in all of creation, what really stood out for me were sort of these three different ways that we can tune into that can help us on our spiritual path. The first being tuning into God in nature, right? And certainly many great souls have. Living here in Northern California, we all know about John Muir. We know about Luther Burbank, who Yogananda called an American saint. And I think many of you in this room are also familiar with Bharat Cornell's work on sharing nature and attuning to God in nature. And as I was thinking about this, and as Devaki said, how can we tune into the lessons that God wants us to learn in nature? Swami has a wonderful song called Channels. And it's got 6 parts, and each part is a different aspect of nature. Birds, trees, stars, flowers, mountains, and rivers. And each of these different aspects has a divine quality that we can learn from and draw inspiration from that gets expressed in this song. Trees standing firm hold the secret of inner power. Give us when tested strength to endure. Flowers, so soft and fragile, stay fragrant though pressed to the ground. May we thus learn forbearance, for in kindness love is found. And then the refrain of this song, Mother, we thank you, your joy shines in everything. This is to the Divine Mother, that creative aspect that's in all of nature. Your joy is everywhere. Open these channels that the world once more may see. So we can attune to God in nature, and we can attune to those divine qualities to help us on the spiritual path. The second is attuning to God in every human being. an obvious conclusion, but the ramifications, I feel, are just so important for our time. Yogananda spoke often about the need to overcome prejudice based on caste, race, religion, and so many of the other categories that get used to divide and define people. And obviously some of our brothers and sisters are a little bit more awake than others, but they all have a seed of God in them. And as it says in our Festival of Light that we read each week, in God all are equal, not only Jesus Christ, Lord Krishna, and great saints everywhere, but even in essence, those on earth who have sinned most greatly. And Yogananda spoke about our need to expand our love from the immediate family, the sort of us four and no more consciousness, as he called it, out into the world, into society and the world at large. And he said that by doing so, by expanding our love to include all human beings, that we grow closer to God. We become channels for that divine love to flow through us. And in that process, that love purifies and transforms and uplifts us. And here again, because I think very musically, there's another one of Swami's songs that I was reminded of. Brothers, who knows the truth knows all men as brothers. The Gita says, when a man beholds all separate beings as existent in the one that has expanded itself into the many, then he merges with Brahma, spirit. So, loving God, seeing God, and all around us, the second way. And then the third one, which Devaki really talked about, is tuning into God within us. We don't have to journey far. We just have to come home to ourselves. That's what self-realization is all about, right? The knowing in all parts of body, mind, and soul that you are now in possession of the kingdom of God, that you do not have to pray that it comes to you, that God's omnipresence is your omnipresence, and all you need to do is improve your knowing. Yogananda also said, God is dearer than the dear, nearer than the near, right? So he's our closest and dearest friend. God is very immediate to us. As it says in our Gita reading this morning, he is the self-offering in those who would expand themselves. He is that self-offering in us. And so, in thinking about this, we tend to spend and really waste so much time worrying about our little selves. We don't need to, because ultimately it's all him. We can just relax. Not in our effort to know him or to remember who we truly are, but in our self-preoccupations. Anything we do well, we can give the credit to him. Anything we do not so well, it's a failure of our attunement. It's something that we're working on. Because ultimately we too are a part of creation, and so we are also in a process of becoming. And we can take comfort in that. As if we were perfect, as Sri Yukteswar said, we'd be adorning some other planet. We're not, so we're here. So, we're learning and growing. So I'm going to just close by talking a little bit about how can we attune to God in ourselves. And certainly meditation is essential and a huge aspect of that. But having spent this past week in seclusion, I was just reminded of how wonderful it is to spend time with God. Just dedicated time. And for those of you who aren't familiar with this, essentially a meditation retreat of sorts, self-guided, right? Where on your email, your cell phone, right? It's just you and God. Meditating, praying, maybe listening to an inspiring talk or two, or reading the writings of Yogananda or Swami Kriyananda. And if we can't take a whole week out of a year to do this, that's okay. Take a few days, or even just half a day once a month if you can, to meditate longer and really just take that time to focus your heart's energy and your mind on the divine. Because it's very easy to go through our lives and forget about God. And having that dedicated time helps to refocus our energy and helps us to remember to invite the divine to be with us in our daily lives. And so, as I've been sort of thinking about this in the beginning of the new year, I think if I were to make one resolution, it would be to live more consciously with God as I go through this coming year. And I really don't have to look very far. All I have to do is expand my awareness. So God bless all of you in your expanding awareness of the divine this coming year.